Great. So, attendees, a very, very warm welcome to you all on behalf of KnowledgeHut. We're very happy that you were able to make it to this webinar. I'm sure a lot of you were looking forward to this webinar. We've received good response on this topic, and I'd like to reaffirm that this is one of the many, many webinars we plan to do in the coming months. And this is one of the many interesting topics we plan to do in the coming months. And of course, special thanks to Mahesh Varadharajan for taking his time out and doing this webinar for KnowledgeHut. Mahesh, on behalf of KnowledgeHut and the entire team, I'd like to sincerely and personally thank you for taking your time out for doing this for us. Mr. Mahesh Varadharajan is a seasoned business agility enabler with over 14 years of IT experience, including leading and coaching agile teams. Mahesh is a safe SPCT candidate, enterprise agile transformation coach and leader, scaled agile trainer, speaker, reviewer in leading international agile conferences. Once again, we are delighted to have him with us today. And the key takeaways we plan to have from today's event will be leading distributed RTEs, leading remote ARTs, understanding large group facilitation practices, handling group dynamics in remote ARTs. And we all hope, we rather are sure that you will enjoy this webinar. And we hope that you'll join us for the future webinars as well. So Mahesh, thank you so much for allowing me to take a few minutes to introduce.
Sure. Thank you. Thanks for the introduction. I hope I'm loud and clear.
Yes, you are. Yes.
Sure. Just feel free to stop me if there are any issues in screen sharing or hearing me out. Okay. Thank you.
Sure, we shall do that.
Good evening, everyone. Today, I'll jump into the topic directly because my introduction is already done. My name is Mahesh. Uh, Today, I'm here to share little bit of my experiences. So this presentation or the talk, you can say I'm going to distribute 50% of this 45 minutes time equally on two parts of this topic. One, which is if you are working in remote agile ways, very specific to the last couple of years where we all have been dwelling in the pandemic, and remote work has become now the new normal. So how agile teams can work effectively in the remote context, and if you are part of a safe implementation, what does it mean in leading, facilitating not just distributed events but also completely remote events? That's going to be my first half of the presentation. In the second half, we will spend little bit of time, maybe one or two case studies based upon the time, in terms of as an RTE of not just remote arts but also distributed arts, what challenges we go through based on my experiences, and what are some experiments we have tried and tested, and what did we learn. So that's going to be the um, storyline of this talk. So without wasting any more time, I'm going to right away jump into the first part of my presentation, which is all around leading, facilitating remote agile teams. And those of us who are part of remote arts, if you are an RTE or a Scrum Master, what are some specific things we should be looking at? So from that perspective, uh, I'm going to start with working successfully in Agile with remote team members. Again, the context is remote Agile release trains. The entire train works remotely. And therefore, we will be looking at, okay, when you're not just talking about remote, more than 80% of Agile trains worldwide are also distributed. You can now say dispersed and obviously remote many places. The economy has still not opened up. Many offices are still working remotely. So how do we learn to not just deal with the remote context, but continue to also have our traditional distributed agile problem, which is accommodating time zone differences, bringing people together for collaboration, conducting any events which can probably be in a shared time zone in an overlapping time. How does that work? Then creating an effective working environment, especially in the remote context, thanks to GoToWebinar, the remote webinar tool, without which we will not be here today. Similarly, when it comes to infrastructure and technological support, how does it really make a difference? Supporting collaboration. Now, if we were in the face to face, we could have done some icebreaker activities. Now, does that mean in the remote context, all of that is going away? Not necessary. Those are still those important events for us. And how do we facilitate effective online events? Some tips and techniques around that. So I want to pay attention to the time zone differences. When you are launching remote arts, just like any other art, co-located, distributed, or now remote, we all are familiar with the Tuckman's stages of team or group dynamics. When you are part of a group or a team, we all go through these stages of forming, storming, norming, performing, and adjourning. What is in it for us if you are an RTE or a Scrum Master at a team level or RTE at a train level? What's in it for us? To recognize and be aware that A, this is normal. This is the expected pattern. But then what's in it for me? What can I do as a RTE? Now I have a job in serving the art to navigate through these Tuckman's stages as seamlessly as we can and help the train succeed. Instead of, for example, storming, there are lots of opinions on the table. There is diversity, which is great, but we also have to move forward. We just can't be discussing, debating, hearing out everyone's opinion and not deciding at all. We need to move forward. We need to achieve consensus. There is a bigger goal for us to achieve. Should we not keep that in mind? There needs to be somebody like an RTE to help the train take through that path. Conflict management, inter-team reactions. How does that play out in the remote world? And norming and performing is the stage when we understand, okay, we are here for a shared purpose. There are some team of teams here for a goal. Now we will see how do we keep aside our differences and look towards the goal that we are here for. Time zones may probably make our sleeping times apart, but doesn't mean that no productive work happens. Let's try to figure ways of working. So some challenges and tips, how do we move forward? Let's say if you are an individual working alone, if one team member is working alone in a time zone, find out whether there are members from other teams in the same time zone and look for opportunities to either restructure or perhaps create a COP in that time zone to add and bring more people together. Even in the remote context, whether or not we are together in the same physical room where we can meet face to face, if we are all from the same time zone, I can still connect people remotely. They are all from same time zone like Indian Standard Time and still get people to collaborate. When you are in blot, when your work is blot, let's say the time zones of the product owner and scrum master are important. Probably even from a team perspective, when you are dependent on these roles to resolve your impediments or blockers, if there is a central time zone that will serve both of them, where the scrum master has an obligation or a responsibility to coach the product owner. And whether or not Scrum Master and product owner are both from the same location, can the time difference really mean that these two guys can help and serve each other effectively? Are they going to work in overlapping hours every day, or what's going to be that core collaboration hours? Because the Scrum Masters will also need to invest significant time with his or her team members in a safe context, maybe with the other teams, and also spend adequate time with the product owner. So not just the choice of the location of the product owner is important, or the teams, including the location of the Scrum Master who has this divergent serving and coaching obligations. Working extended hours, where we create a core window, or like something like we say extended hours, overlapping hours, where we will only use that for collaboration, maybe some key issues to be resolved, and move all the non-core meetings outside this time window. Speaking of the remote context, we cannot pay less attention to the infrastructure. I need a high bandwidth connection for audio and video. I still remember in one of the PI plannings when the pandemic unfolded in March 2020, the RTE was not having a good connectivity from his or her side, and the meeting abruptly ended. Everybody, hundreds and thousands of people, had to be emailed or communicated, please rejoin, we are getting back. Bandwidth is very important. Hardwares being able to, okay, face to face is still the most effective and efficient method of communication. Enable human interactions, but is there a better way? Of course, webcams, headsets, making sure I have a noise free audio connectivity. And if there are some technical support, if you need to have from your IT support teams, and let's say you do a PI planning event in the night time during Indian hours, are you going to have some technical support covering all the time zones? And then if there are going to be some files that you're going to store and retrieve, is it going to be a OneDrive? Is it going to be a Google Drive? A SharePoint repository where all the members of the train may have access to? You may want to identify them and communicate them way ahead of the time. Make sure people have access to those drive. Imagine in a PI planning, in a remote PI planning event or any program event, a stakeholder is presenting and something goes wrong. And if the presentations are up and running on your shared repository, you can just pull it up and say, okay, would you be able to just connect in the audio and speak up, continue speaking up? Quite possible, right? And obviously, a tooling that can support virtual breakout rooms, something like a Zoom. You may also think of WebEx, a GoToWebinar, whatever tools and technologies that are available. So this is where we spoke about audio video conferencing, instant messaging platform. Is it going to be Microsoft Teams? Is it going to be a Zoom chat? What is going to be the primary method of communication within the train? And then if there is some important communication, where are you going to organize your files, your folders, your repositories, and communicate that? The choice of the tools, for example, um, while we all use ALM tools, it could be Jira, it could be Jira Align, it could be Rally. But when it comes to things like setting up your program boards, doing your risk management, and let's say some of those features are not part and parcel of those ALM tool, most often people try to use complementary tools or extended tools like the Murals and the Miros to support some of these program board visualization. So you must have done the groundwork as an RTE in order to figure out how are you going to not only help visualize, but figure out how these tools can aid remote working, remote planning, and remote execution. So moving back to the team forming stage, it's very important that we all have an identity, creating a team name, a team vision, very clear agenda for when what events are going to happen within the team. Is every Wednesday, let's say 6 p.m. Indian time, is my sprint planning or iteration planning time. It's predictable. I'm prepared for that, isn't it? And then we are also creating folders for online files. Remember, we also talked about organizing your repositories, defining working agreements and protocols for remote working. What time is going to be available? It's okay to ping somebody for an help on the other side of the world. What time it's okay to set up meetings? What are our core working hours, overlapping hours? If there is a kind of diversity of opinion, how are we going to achieve consensus? What's a definition of done? And things like that. More so when we talk about team collaboration, keeping remote team members informed. For example, I still remember in the pre-COVID world, while it was still not completely remote, but still distributed arts and distributed agile was in practice. We even getting communication timely or getting information between offshore and onshore was such a pain. There was gaps in communication. There were obviously misinterpreted information that were coming in, half-baked information that were coming in. And what are some, oh, we made this decision. Sorry, folks from India, we missed to inform you guys. Something's quite likely. And then we often encourage, okay, we may be remote, but does that mean we don't need social time? How about either before or after PI planning? You keep some time for socialization. It's maybe called networking. People to meet and greet, people to spend time. Remember, we often say today our network is our net worth. Building trust is fundamental to getting the job done, getting team of teams to collaborate and deliver the PI objectives. When people don't trust each other, people don't feel psychologically safe, how great work happens. And how much are we encouraging practices of swarming like paid work, so that work is also speeding up, and at the same time you have upskilling, cross skilling. We eliminate practices of that can induce delays like your code reviews, so on and so forth. Towards facilitating effective online meetings or events, the first thing is, we often say, if there was a meeting that I was a part of and it was poorly executed or facilitated, it's often a resultant of maybe not so great facilitation. So what can we do to mitigate that? Before meeting, after meeting, and during the meeting. If I am the RTE of the train, I need to have my facilitation tools, my techniques, my practices. What are some things I'll do before the event, during the event, and after the event? It could be planning for the time boxes, who should be invited, what are some prerequisites that I need to take care of. If it's a PI planning, I need to get the decks uploaded, get ready. I should have blocked everybody's calendars, and I should have made out clear instructions from an agenda planning perspective, the choice of the tools and technologies, communication methods, so on and so forth. And while I execute the meeting, try to give clear instructions one at a time. Avoid repetition. It's if we make the instruction clear and precise, I can avoid repetition. And it's also important to manage time boxes. Just because it's remote doesn't mean we do more time. It can be little bit more, but how much more? You still have to manage time boxes. The more we are able to visualize and project things on the screen, people can connect to that. Ask questions to connect, to make sure you clarify. You encourage people to participate. Capturing notes. Oh, there is a draft plan review that's going on, and there needs to be some item that needs to be followed up for the upcoming management review. I need to make some notes. And as you make some decisions on the program board or on your risk sheet, is it updated real time for people to see across the world, given that it's all remote? So we come to what I call the first section of this webinar, end of the first section, where so far we only invested time around what I call leading, facilitating, and working with remote agile context, uh, things like that. Now we will spend some time going through what I call couple of case studies around RTEs working in distributed and remote arts. Case study number one is from a global beverage major. Now you could see the kind of distribution across, where we had obviously the development teams from India, and you could see that the heart had stakeholders from UK, from US, from Canada, the business owners from Canada, and some people also from Romania in Europe. So what are the roles? The key art leadership, whenever we refer to art or program leadership team, we are referring to the three amigos: RTE, product management, and the system architect. Predominantly US, one person from UK, business owners from three countries: US, UK, Canada. Development teams, predominantly India, with also extended in Romania and the US. And in this case, given the nature of the distribution, we had a proxy RTE, what I call the dual slash the co-RTE slash proxy RTE model, where the offshore safe coach was extending upon to that role, which was an experiment we conducted for two PIs in India. What were the challenges for the primary RTE? Obviously, when you talk about the extreme time zone, US, let's say Central Time and Indian Time, we are now talking about 11 and a half hours difference, which was very limited collaboration during overlapping hours. The RTE was unable to connect with all of the Scrum Masters one to one, the leaders across the world, the regional leaders across the world, and keep abreast of the happenings. Some context when we speak about the RTE role, we are referring to this person as a servant leader and a coach of the train, who's not always telling and mentoring, but always that guiding people. I don't decide for them, I rather help them decide. That's the kind of the role we are talking about. And obviously, when we know that the teams and the arts are should be self-organizing and self-managing, even let's take the example of our airplanes. We do have autopilot mode in your airplanes. Doesn't mean there are no pilots who are probably flying those airplanes. Yes, or isn't it? RTs are something like that. You may want to really put the train in an autopilot mode from a scaling and sustenance perspective. That may be a healthier way. It may be more the right thing to do, but doesn't mean you completely knock off your hand. There is somebody needs to help and serve the train. That's where the RT role comes in. Facilitate, guide, communicate, help resolve impediments, help manage risks, and drive relentless improvement. So obviously for this experiment, what we needed is a shift in the mindset. For anything new you want to do, we need to exhibit a growth mindset. Okay, let me try, let me explore, rather than saying, oh, this is how stuff works here. I stick to what I know of because I fear failure. That's a fixed mindset. Let's try. Which means only if there is a willingness to change, any change can happen. That's a prerequisite. And why is this slide here? I'm not here to explain this because this can be a separate topic by itself. There is a reason why I have brought in this slide to explain the context that if you have launched your train in the remote world, it's still as per the guided safe implementation roadmap where people have been trained, people have been made aware, value streams have been identified. You have gone through these steps. If you have not done this, I'm not here to tell you how to fix that train which has already derailed or about to get derailed. We assume that the launch happened as guided by the roadmap, and yet you face certain challenges. That's the context of the case study. So, some things that we tried out with the dual RTE model. See, for example, uh, when the primary RTE was from the US and the secondary or the offshore RTE was from India, the primary RTE was new to SAFE and obviously um, had this question: how is this two roles going to work together? For example, if let's say if I were that secondary RTE or the co RTE, the primary person had this doubt: Mahesh, what's in it for me? When I look at the responsibilities in the Scaled Agile website, there is a lot of the stuff. What is in it that you will do versus I do? I am confused because we didn't discuss that. This person wasn't sure how is this model going to be operationalized. Is this even the right thing to do? And believe me, this person never asked for support. The leadership of this art assumed that for the train to be effective, we needed an arrangement of two RTEs. So RTEs weren't sure what will this arrangement look like in the long run. And this was such that the client did not take this proxy role seriously because the service provider was offering this role for free. Oh, we have an offshore safe coach or an SPC. He or she can step up as your offshore RTE. You get a free service. Obviously, it wasn't taken with a lot of seriousness. Now, art members were confused which RTE to look up for what, although we tell them location proximity, time zone proximity. And the primary RTE felt this is like a threat to his job, his or her job with this model. Now, the question is, leave aside how what were some challenges that the two RTEs were sitting and figuring out. Is the dual RTE model really needed in every distributed train or remote train? Now I was looking at, okay, what are some opportunities as an RTE? Obviously, we facilitate all the program events. But does that mean RTE should be the eternal facilitator, always leading, orchestrating? Is that the nature of the job? Is that the only key thing that the RTE should do? RTE is an enabler to me, the managing the flow of work, not a barrier. So who can then support the RTE? Could be a passionate scrum masters across the board within the train who can step up, help the RTEs to lead and facilitate the program events or art events. Should I really have to create another role, another RTE role to help resolve this? That's the question I was asking myself. Then when we looked at where the real support on the other end is needed across the train, we saw certain problems. For example, the art had certain part-time scrum masters from regions like Europe, where the primary RTE was from the US and obviously did not have a camaraderie or a great bonding with the leaders in Romania or Europe. And obviously, you can't really resolve challenges of this nature by just talking to the fellow scrum master based out of the other end of the world. This was one clear need for somebody to invest time beyond your core time zone hours. Certain POPMs were in UK, outside the states. Therefore, this again, when these guys were actually having some communication and collaboration issues, RTE needed to support them. Many Scrum Masters were new to the train, which means RTE's time to coach them was key. When they were outside, offshored, RTE himself or herself was time constrained to be able to support them. And this RTE was very different in the fact that, oh, Mahesh, I'm not going to adjust my working hours. I'm going to start my day at 7 a.m. Central Time. That's it. Which means your collaboration time can be only so much. And offshore leaders were probably have to conduct dual stand-ups. Maybe rather the teams have to go through one offshore stand-up and one onshore and offshore combined stand-up every day, which was obviously putting them, not feeling good about what's happening here. Why should I run two stand-ups, be a part of two DSUs every day? And RT was far from even connecting and understanding what's driving and causing all of this. I'll quickly spend some time on the next case study before I give in my experience. Now, while this previous case study had that dual RTE experiment with a lot of, as you could see, operational challenges because the ask never came from the client, neither was safe suggestive on how can we even operationalize this, etc., etc. Here is a case study of a telecom major where the good news is there are only now two time zones. One is India and other is US. While some of the development team members and scrum masters were from India, rest of them were from the US. What's the scenario here? There were SPCs to serve the train in both the time zones. Primary RTE himself was competent in safe, comes from a seasoned scrum mastery background, which means the coaching needed for the RTE himself or herself was significantly less. The RTE was flexible to accommodate their start time and end time to support people in India. Offshore people were willing to work in overlapping hours. And RTE, although not co-located in the same time zone as the people in the other end of the world, like India, the offshore coaches stepped up and served in some of the RTE nature of the job for the first one or two PIs. So therefore, in this train, we never had the need for what we call a co/proxy RTE, unlike the previous case study. Now, when I look at this and that, what am I here to learn or what am I here to share? As obviously in the first one, we pivoted the dual RTE experiment after two PIs, not because we failed. We felt the second person who was the co-RTE from offshore, that person was making the highest impact, not just in the name or in the hat as a RTE, but as a coach. The coaching rather had more impact on the train. We rather said, what's in a name? Let's call it a coach or an SPC serving the train. And let's not have any confusion to for the people to understand whom to look for what. And in the second case study, although we saw that the SPC stepped up to help the train managed its own. Now the question arises, if there were not SPCs or SPCs or coaches is a transient arrangement, who can then help the RTE to either facilitate, run the events, support the distributed and remote trains? One alternative to me could be the Scrum Masters, passionate Scrum Masters across the world from each of those time zones could be an alternative. Where you still have SPCs to leverage, they can be another alternative. Then if you had support of local leadership, things like the LACE, they can be the third alternative. Proxy RTE, it's not suggested officially by Scaled Agile. None of us will even see that role. But we have heard certain case studies in the larger community. Providing free services does not mean that it's going to work all the time. You may want to be understand, is the client really wanting this? Distributed and remote arts are here to stay in the new normal. The question is, are we prepared for the new challenges? Things are going to look like this. Maybe we go for a hybrid model. It's not about, what I call responsibilities are shared, not split when you have a proxy RTE arrangement. That's the bigger thing. We have to figure out what works in our context. Now, if you recall the case study number 1, what I could have done better or what we could have done better. First of all, the question is, if you have too many time zones, is that the real model in the first place that we may want to continue doing, continue operating? That's the question we should first speak up. Because remember, when we talk about outsourcing, offshoring, there is a cost and there is a benefit. You may want to quantify that. The second thing to look at is, sometimes we jump into solutions like, oh, maybe the secondary RTE model could be the rescue for this train. To me, setting the train for success, there's a lot of factors, including how many teams, how are these teams structured, how many time zones, and not the secret sauces creating another layer of RTE. Helping the patterns emerge, waiting for them to pop up for 1 or 2 PIs, following which, if we had done some intervention, could have been a better way to me, handle the same problem. So with that little thoughts, I would like to thank each and every one for making today's session. If you felt the session was valuable, feel free to share your feedback. And we have a lot of RTE classes coming in, where we could spend more around the other complications that we all must have seen in our day-to-day jobs.